This is Erom's Ibehi here, and a lot of people have been trying to pass the CISSP exam, and it's just very hard to do. And the question is, why is this so? Why is this so hard to do? I mean, there are a lot of people who go through the university system in the world, and they graduate from the university, they have their degrees, and it's not because people cannot study, it's not because people don't know what they're doing, but when it comes to CISSP, it's just an extra challenge for people to do. It's just so difficult to do. And I have some friends who have been trying to do it for some time, and they have these challenges as well. The question is why? Well, there are a lot of reasons for that. The number one reason is because of the broad scope of the study material. The material, like covers a lot of domains and on a very broad level, but it doesn't go very deep on any specific subject. So therefore, the student have to cover so much material and doesn't go deep in it. So, if you are writing an exam, or you're going to do an exam with about 250 questions, and these questions can come from anywhere in the study material, it becomes so tough to get yourself prepared for such an exam. So that's one of the major reasons. Well, that you cannot do anything about, but there are two other reasons that you can do something about, which we're going to talk about right now. And number one is the fact that most of the materials that are out there are so dry. If you look at the books, you look at the video materials, you look at everything that covers the CISSP training, they're so dry. It is so boring. I remember that a few days ago, somebody was complaining about the challenges of studying for the CISSP. So I said, okay, let me see, can't you take a look at some, YouTube videos? Take a look at some YouTube videos, and then you have some great information from there. Personally, I've not, checked out YouTube videos for a very long time as regards the CISSP training. So, and the guy said to me, yeah, but there's not, much to see there. So I decided to go to YouTube and check some things out. What I saw was, I saw a lot of boring training materials. I saw a lot of people going through the, PowerPoint presentation, talking about very specific security terminology in a very dry form. And I had my headphone on, and at a certain moment, I watched for about 10 minutes and I almost fell asleep. I was so bored to death. And I go, wow, this is really very boring for a lot of people who are trying to, do something and get motivated and pass their CISSP exam. So then I asked myself, I said, why can't they put a bit more enthusiasm into the video materials, okay? But it is a serious matter, so people feel that if you need to discuss serious matter, you gotta be very serious about it. Well, I think the training materials deserve a bit more, enthusiasm, a bit more, how do you say it, fun into it, because learning has to be fun. And if you make learning fun, then you can reach more students about it. So that's another thing, okay? And you could do something about that by trying to locate somebody who can teach you in a fun way, to put it, to get enthusiasm, to wake up your brain cells to say, okay, wow, this is great. This is something we would like to do. And to, come into a good spirit in your training. The other thing I'd like to, inform you, which you can do something about it, is I've gone through a lot of the books, and most of the books are very dry. People will say, yeah, it is a dry material. It is dry and boring. It's like medical books. Well, I feel that information security is an exciting material, and you could make it exciting. But you cannot just, I've not written a exciting book about it, so I can't recommend an exciting book to you to say, go and buy the book, you'll get excited about it. But you know, I can give you 1 or 2 tips that you're going to use to make the training a bit more exciting for you. So I have a book here, which is basically an electronic book. I'm not going to tell you the author of the book. I just want to give you an example of how you can make your training a bit more exciting, a bit more lively for yourself. Because I discovered that one of the reasons why people find it challenging to pass the CISSP exam is because they are trying to memorize the concepts, okay? You can't memorize the concept and pass the exam. There are things you need to memorize, so things you have to memorize, but they are not concept. You know, if you want to, for example, memorize the type of encryption standard, maybe DES, triple DES, things like that, just to make sure that you remember the names, that's fine. But you cannot memorize concepts, and those concepts you really have to know them, you have to understand them. And because of the way they are presented in books, it's very challenging for people to know those concepts. Let me give you an example. Most of the books, when you pick them up, they're going to start with explaining the triad of information security, which is CIA, this confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the information or the data. So they will explain to you that, okay, in the information security principles is based on the protection of these 3 triads. They will tell you is CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your data, okay? So they will go on to try to define what this means. So let me give you a typical, I read from this. So what actually gives a lot of student headache is that when they start to describe this concept in books, they will use other concepts or other terminology from other domains that they have not discussed yet, or subjects that have not been discussed yet. And therefore, the student get confused because these words you're using, this terminology you are using here, this is page 5 of this book, I've never heard them before. I've never discussed them before anywhere. But these terminologies are discussed maybe in chapter 5, 6 of the books. And that is very confusing for students because it's like you're trying to teach a child algebra when they've not understood what the basic addition and multiplication is in mathematics. It's very, very difficult. I'll give you an example. For example, people are talking about this guy that wrote this book, very brilliant guy. So they're trying to introduce the CIA triad. And it talks about that security controls are typically evaluated on how well they address these core information security tenets. Okay, so that sentence just blows people away because first of all, a lot of people don't even understand what security controls are. If you understand them because you've worked with them for a very long time, that's good for you. But trust me, a lot of people don't understand what that term means, security controls. And somebody can argue and say, hey, you're supposed to have known this before you even start studying for this exam. Well, I'll argue, something else and say, that's not necessarily so, because if you look at the domains of information, the CISSP exam, we have the networking domains, for example. You can just be in a networking industry for a very long time, and you do some physical security with it, and you will be qualified to, be to do the CISSP exam and become a member of, and get your certification. And if you are only working as a system administrator doing some security of your systems for 5, 6, 7 years, then there are a lot of terminologies here that are used in the books that you don't understand because you've never come across them. So because of the broad nature of the material, you always have candidates who are not familiar with terms that are being used in the book in one place or the other. So therefore, when you're talking about security controls, then people go, okay, what are security controls? So, and the other example I have here is that the author then went forward and talked about the vulnerability and risks are also evaluated based on the threat they pose against one or more of the CIA triad principles. That's the same paragraph, okay? So now we're talking about vulnerability and risk. So that just blows a lot of people away. So the question is, what are vulnerabilities? What are risks? Whereas the idea of risk and vulnerability, these are and threats, these are concepts that are discussed in other chapters of this book. These are concepts that has to do with other aspects of the CISSP program. You come across them along the program, but when you come across them, they are explained in a way that you can understand. But right now, at the beginning of the book, it's just dry. It's not, many people are not understanding it. So, and I give you a last example. It said, many instances of unauthorized disclosure of sensitive or confidential information are the result of human error, oversight, or ineptitude. Okay, so here they were talking about also confidentiality. We're talking about the confidentiality now, that many instances of unauthorized disclosure. The question is, what is an unauthorized disclosure? Okay, so people who are just starting out, remember we're just in the first few pages of this book, talking about what is unauthorized disclosure. I don't understand what that is. So the writer of this book, brilliant guy, they've just thrown in so many complex terminologies that they assume that anybody that is reading this book understands these things, and it's not true. And people it's a wrong assumption, because there are a lot of people who are reading these books, who are preparing for these exams, who are not even English, don't even have English as their mother tongue. If English is not their main language, that is their second language. So if you were in Germany, or you were in Holland, or you were in Belgium, or any other country in the world that don't speak English as the main language, you will end up having challenges even understanding these words, talk less of trying to get the understanding of the concept. So that is a problem. And for people who are, English speaking people, they are born English, they've been speaking English is their birth, they still have problems, challenges in understanding the concept, because for the fact that you speak English doesn't mean that you understand complex terminologies that are industrial specific, okay, specific to a certain industry. So those are the challenges. When I was studying for the CISSP exam back in 2003, I had some of these challenges as well, because it was new to me. I need to understand all these things to be able to know the subject. Remember, you got to know the subject. It's not just about studying it and trying to remember what you study. It is all about knowing it. If you know it, it stays with you permanently. And when you are writing the exam, because you know it, you just write the exam smoothly and you pass the exam. So the goal is to know the subject and not to either memorize it or just to learn it by heart. You got to know it. So how do you help yourself with this type of stuff? What I tell my students is this. When you look at this material, like if you take a look at confidentiality here, everything we've discussed is about the confidentiality of information or data. And you have come across these complex concepts like security controls. So what I need you to do is to Google security controls. So define security controls. Once you define it, you now understand what security controls are. Security controls can be both physical controls and policies and other measures that are put in place to ensure that you protect your network or infrastructure against the CIA threats. Okay, so if you Google it, you will find out. So what you need to do is understand these terminologies first. What are security controls? What does it mean when we talk about security controls? Number one. Number two, find out what are vulnerabilities. What is risk? Define it for yourself. Write it down. Say, I don't really understand the word vulnerability, so I look for the definition of vulnerability and I'm going to write it down. So vulnerability means blah, 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 you write it down. Risk means blah, 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 you write it down, okay? Even when you think, if you think you know, then ask yourself the question, can you define it? If you cannot define it, then you don't know. So then you need to look for it and define it, okay? Say, and then you need to look at, for example, there's another term that I came across that talk about countermeasures. So countermeasures and safeguards, okay? So those things are just giving me a headache. So what are countermeasures? So that word, because you don't understand what that word is, can disturb you mentally for even going further, in the studies. So what you need to do is to find out what countermeasures is. Define countermeasures, okay? After you've defined all these terms for yourself, then reread the chapter again, okay? So the first thing you do, read it through, like I've just done. You could talk about the CIA confidentiality, integrity, and availability. You read it through, and after you've read it through, you're going to come across these difficult terms. Okay, you might not think they are difficult terms, but if you read a sentence and you don't understand it, that means there's a difficult term there that you didn't understand. That's why you didn't understand it. So what you need to do is to go there, underline that difficult terms, locate it on Google or search for it every other place you want to search for it, understand the meaning, and then make sure you understand it, because once you know, you can't unknow it. Okay, so by knowing it, it will help you to really go start understanding what you are studying. Okay, so once you go through, you read it through in the first instance, you then go and pick up all the difficult terminologies, difficult words, and then you walk them through, take notes, and then the third time you go back and reread that whole subject, and then you're done. You will notice that after you've done that, then go to the questions. Some of these books have questions at the back. By the time you start asking yourself those questions, you discover that you start getting very good scores. Question number one, you read it, okay, oh, you know what it is. Question number two, you read it, you know what it is. Because there are some things that, just to give you one last example, there are some things that you might think you know, but you don't really know. For example, when we talk about disclosure, for example, we talk about unauthorized disclosure, Okay, so which basically mean one or two things. You have two issues there. First of all, there's a disclosure of information, and the disclosure is unauthorized. Okay, which means that there is the opposite side of it, which is an authorized disclosure. So now you have an unauthorized disclosure. When you say something is unauthorized, what does that mean? What does that mean? If you're saying, if somebody is giving you the authority to authorize you to disclose that information, how is the authority given, and who in the chain of authority gives you that authority to do that? And and if you have your authority at one level, the authority goes up or down? Okay, so if I am given the authority to disclose information to somebody, does it mean that I can disclose that information and any of that information that is under that level of authority, or only the specific level of information that I'm allowed to disclose? So when you take a subject, make sure you understand the concept completely. Make sure you understand, ask yourself different questions surrounding that subject and answer it yourself. And if you cannot answer it, get Google involved. And for me, I've discovered that is the best way that works for me, and it might work for you too. And it has worked for a lot of my students that I've encouraged to do the same. So that's it for me. I wish you luck in your endeavor to pass your CISSP exam, and give me a shout out if it works. Okay? Thank you for watching. See ya. Bye.